Apostasy, the ultimate form of liberation. The idea of leaving one's faith is celebrated, but only when that faith is Islam. Why is there no ex-Christian pride movement? Where are the ex-Jew NGOs fighting for freedom from their own faiths? It's not liberation, but an operation. It is carefully curated, funded, and weaponized. It's sold as a triumph of the individual will, yet its true origins lie in something far more insidious. Historical contexts reveal an unsettling consistency. After the Reformation, there was never a celebration of ex-Catholic pride in Europe. But today, we see a relentless push for ex-Muslim pride. Why this distinction? In Orientalism, Edward Said stated that Islam was viewed with fear and hatred, not because it was understood, but because it seemed to pose a threat to European Christian culture. Surah An-Nisa, verse 137, gives a critical insight. Those who believe, then disbelieve, then believe, then disbelieve, Allah will not forgive them. This isn't spiritual exploration, but spiritual erosion. The Quran condemns this pattern of collapse, a cycle that hollows out the soul until nothing true can take root. And this phenomenon is not new. Colonial empires, particularly the British and French, didn't start their praise for apostasy in the 21st century. It dates back to the 1800s, when British and French colonial officers in Egypt and India would elevate Muslim converts to Christianity as proof of the enlightenment that their occupation supposedly brought. These conversions were used as weapons to demonstrate superiority, not spiritual freedom. As Bernard Lewis framed it in The Political Language of Islam, in the context of colonialism, European powers, particularly the British and French, sought to undermine Islamic authority by promoting converts to Christianity as symbols of the civilizing mission. These individuals were paraded as living proof of the benefits of European occupation, not for their spiritual transformation, but to demonstrate the superiority of the Western imperialist agenda. What we're witnessing today is not a modern revolt, but a colonial revival. The same empire that once paraded converts as trophies now funds apostates as activists. The names have changed, but the goal remains: dismantle Islam from within, using Muslims as the tools. This time, the operation wears a liberal mask. And behind that mask is where the industry begins. Behind the scenes of every so-called ex-Muslim group is an architecture of power. The Council of Ex-Muslims in the UK, Faith to Faithless, and ex-Muslims of North America, XMNA, didn't arise from grassroots movements. These are operations, funded, structured, and aligned with geopolitical agendas. They don't just support apostates, they incite cultural demolition. Their networks are directly tied to major think tanks, Zionist organizations, and the US State Department. These affiliations don't just support a narrative, they create it. John Esposito, in The Future of Islam, highlights the politicization of Islam, especially by external forces. It led to significant ideological rifts within Muslim societies, often manipulated to serve geopolitical strategies. The UK's Prevent Strategy and the US CVE Countering Violent Extremism budget quietly bankroll these ex-Muslim groups. But these aren't just funds allocated for human rights. They are there to dismantle Muslim identity under the guise of liberalism. In The Muslims Are Coming, Islamophobia, extremism, and the domestic war on terror, Arun Kunnani presented Prevent as not about violence prevention, but ideological policing. It aims to remake Islam into a secular liberal identity compatible with state interests. Take, for example, the RAND report from 2007, titled Building Moderate Muslim Networks. It lays the groundwork for exporting ex-Muslim cells into Muslim-majority regions. Foundations like Open Society and the National Endowment for Democracy channel funds into apostate-linked outreach programs, signaling a deliberate and systemic campaign to reshape Muslim communities. Cheryl Benar, senior political scientist at RAND Corporation, in her 2003 report, Civil Democratic Islam Partners, Resources and Strategies, openly argued that the United States must identify and empower liberal, secular and dissident Muslim voices to challenge traditional religious authority. Her view is unapologetically strategic and secularist. She advocates engineering ideological shifts within Muslim societies, even if that means propping up marginal reformist figures. This isn't a neutral academic study, but a geopolitical playbook designed to reshape Islam in alignment with US interests. These groups don't just echo Israeli talking points, they're tuned to them. Networks like XMNA are not just political players, they're agents in a broader PSYOPs campaign. Israel's cyber intelligence unit, Unit 8200, has long been engaged in narrative warfare against Muslims. These ex-Muslim networks are integral to that broader plan. While Western regimes claim to defend freedom of belief, they treat apostasy from Islam not as a private decision, but as a strategic weapon. When apostates are platformed, funded, and weaponized, the question isn't whether they left Islam. It's why their departure is being turned into a war cry. Throughout history, Islamic empires generally allowed apostasy. But unlike modern Western secular regimes, they didn't treat apostates as enemies to be hunted down. Instead, apostasy was seen through the lens of civil consequences. It was never an issue of mass persecution. This contrast is crucial. The Quran never commands forced faith. In fact, it says in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 256, "Let there be no compulsion in religion." This is a divine declaration of freedom of choice. A freedom that is often manipulated when it suits the imperial narrative. Western governments, however, seem to endorse the idea of apostasy as a wound, one that needs to be treated as trauma. But why? Why is apostasy only treated as a moral dilemma when it comes to Islam? This is a question the West avoids answering. Saba Mahmood criticized this hypocrisy in her book Religious Difference in a Secular Age. The liberal discourse of religious freedom often treats Muslim piety as a problem to be solved, a deviation from normative subjectivity rather than a legitimate ethical stance. Secularism, in this framework, functions less as a neutral guarantor of freedom than as a civilizing mission. In the Ottoman and Mughal empires, apostasy was treated as civil treason, not a reason for witch hunts. Yet today, Western-funded apostasy clinics and de-radicalization programs are set up to treat Muslim apostasy as a pathological condition. Meanwhile, Western secular states enforce their own belief systems in ways far more oppressive than any imagined Islamic law. Consider France's hijab ban, which forces Muslim girls to choose between their faith and their right to education. Western secularism forces beliefs and practices on its citizens, especially Muslims. In Secularism Confronts Islam, Olivier Roy argues that the French obsession with regulating Islamic symbols is not about neutrality. It's about enforcing a cultural conformity under the guise of secularism. Laïcité has become a tool for stigmatizing Muslims rather than a principle of equal treatment. This hypocrisy is evident when you examine Western attitudes toward religious freedom. Secular states allow children to transition genders at the age of 12, but insist that Muslim children who choose to wear the hijab are victims of religious indoctrination. It reveals the selective application of freedom and consent logic. In Napoleon's Egypt, invading the Middle East, Juan Cole concluded that Napoleon was deeply aware of the need to win over the Muslim clerics and the masses. He presented himself not as a Christian conqueror, but as a friend of Islam, using religious language and public gestures to that effect. The West understood, to rule Muslims, you don't fight the sword. You fracture the soul. The attack isn't on armies or resources, but on the belief itself. And today, that war continues. Not in trenches, but through YouTube thumbnails and TED Talks. Because the new battlefield is the Muslim mind. The so-called ex-Muslim influencer class is carefully constructed to appear as a credible authority on Islam. But ask them some questions about the basics. For example, how many rakat in istinja? Most of them won't even know. They're just grateful not to pray to Muhammad anymore. A shallow rage scripted by pseudo-intellectual secular mentors. This digital class speaks not from knowledge, but from borrowed resentment. Their narratives are not born of personal introspection or theological exploration, but from a shared template that echoes across social media. And most importantly, none of them are scholars. In his book Misquoting Muhammad, Jonathan Brown articulated how in Islamic tradition, knowledge is not just about information, but about transmission, verification, and trust. Without this chain, one's opinions are as weightless as dust. Not one among this influencer class is a trained mufti, jurist, or theologian. Their credentials are social media following, not years of study under learned scholars or mastery of the Arabic source texts. Unlike Christianity, where even seminary-trained pastors have deconverted, no recognized Islamic scholar has ever left the Deen after studying it comprehensively. The deeper the knowledge, the stronger the faith. They all say the same things, that they escaped, that Islam stole their childhood, and that there's no freedom in Islam. But this freedom always seems to end in lucrative book deals, Patreon subscriptions, and TED Talk appearances. It's a carefully curated cycle of exploitation. As Hamza Yusuf described in Interview on Spiritual Materialism, modern critiques of the religion often cloak consumerism in the language of liberation. What they call freedom is just another form of enslavement to self, to market, and to trend. Frantz Fanon, in his seminal work Black Skin, White Masks, describes how colonized minds learn to despise their own heritage. These ex-Muslim influencers are a digital age manifestation of that same phenomenon. Minds colonized by Western liberalism, seeking to prove their allegiance by rejecting their own roots. YouTube's algorithm ensures these narratives spread by recommending the same set of talking points, creating an echo chamber of anti-Islamic content. Over 90% of ex-Muslim influencers produce nearly identical content, telling the same story and making the same arguments. This isn't organic discourse. It's an engineered narrative. Safia Umoja Noble exposed this in Algorithms of Oppression. Search engines and algorithms are not neutral. They reflect and amplify the biases of dominant culture, often under the illusion of objectivity. This is never about content. It's a containment field. Apostasy from Islam is amplified. Apostasy from Western dogma is erased. The algorithm doesn't just promote, it also polices. Apostasy is now a currency, but only if it serves the regime. And the question is no longer who left, but who profits. The same West that touts the virtue of apostate rights is the same West that imprisons whistleblowers, bans journalists, and censors dissent. Why does apostasy from Islam garner such sympathy when it weakens Muslim resistance? Yet apostasy from secularism, liberalism, or Zionism is not just ignored, but criminalized. Noam Chomsky aptly described this manipulation in Media Control, the spectacular achievements of propaganda, that the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. The double standards are glaring. Take the case of Brother Rashid, a Moroccan ex-Muslim convert to Christianity who is welcomed with open arms in Washington, D.C. think tanks. Meanwhile, ex-Christians like Bart Ehrman, who critique their former faith, are sidelined, ignored, or dismissed. High-profile converts like Yvonne Ridley, once a British journalist captured by the Taliban, were vilified in UK media after embracing Islam. Not for any act of violence, but for choosing a system the West deems alien. Even Hamza Yusuf, who converted young and later became one of America's most respected Islamic scholars, faced years of suspicion and marginalization. In recalling the Caliphate, decolonization and world order, Salman Saeed observed that there's a market for native informants, those who confirm the West's prejudices about Islam. In contrast, Muslims who seek to deconstruct Western assumptions are treated not as intellectuals, but as threats to liberal order. Apostasy only matters when it serves the empire. Walk away from Islam, and you're hailed as brave. Walk toward it, and you're branded a threat. They don't fear the choice, they fear the direction. Because in a world built on lies, choosing truth is the first act of war. The Quran makes it clear in Surah Al-Baqarah verse 256, "Let there be no compulsion in religion." Yet, while Islam allows for free choice, it also demands accountability. Reject Islam if you wish, but understand that rejecting the truth brings its own consequences. The rise of ex-Muslims is not a threat to Islam. It's a reflection of the desperation of the system trying to crush it. If Islam were truly false, why would the West need billion-dollar psyops to undermine it? In postmodernism and the new imperialism of Western culture, Ziauddin Sardar explained why Islam must be discredited, vilified, and eventually marginalized. Not because it poses a threat of violence, but because it offers an alternative worldview, an epistemology that cannot be absorbed into the Western cultural matrix without fundamentally transforming it. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Islam began as something strange and will return to being strange." This alienation, this feeling of being out of place in the world, is foretold. Apostates, in their estrangement, reflect a deeper truth. The system is faltering, not Islam. Ultimately, the aim isn't to free people. It's to prepare them for the global anti-messianic order, a system that promises freedom but delivers only emptiness. This is the core of the Dajjal's narrative. And Islam, in its defiance, refuses to bow. In the end, apostasy is not a threat to Islam. It is a tool wielded by those who seek to shape the narrative. Islam doesn't chase defectors. It calls the truthful. The Deen isn't desperate. It's defiant. The apostates chose lies. Now they shall dwell in it.